What's up everybody, D-Man back. Welcome to a brand new video, and today we're going to be jumping into my first initial impressions to the newest MonsterVerse installment, Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire, the 5th cinematic entry of the MonsterVerse, and let's talk about it, you guys. I'm gonna have a lot more videos about this movie over the next coming days. I'm gonna talk a lot more about it, and I will be here to engage in this discussion with you guys. Really quickly, first thing you're gonna notice, if I'm sounding really off or if my energy levels are weird, if you haven't seen my last video and you don't know, I did almost die a couple days ago. I was having anaphylactic shock, and so I was in the ER, so my throat's a little messed up. Sorry if I feel a little off in this video. It's my bad. I almost died of cringe. After all these years, some Chinese food almost did me in, cooked in peanut oil, and included some cashews that I was not made aware of when I was given the meal. So it was almost the end of an era right there. If I didn't upload anything past the other day, that's why I would have been dead. But I'm not dead, and I made it to the movie and I watched the movie. I didn't die yet. I had to see Godzilla and Kong back on screen. Are you kidding me? Shout out the Cavity Colors shirt. It's great. Also, shout out the theater merch I got. We got the new Godzilla Kong: The New Empire popcorn bucket. This thing's incredible. Each individual side has its own designs and cool stuff on it. I also walked out of there with the Godzilla Kong and Suko plushies, which I thought was really cute that AMC did. That's really cute. And the Godzilla glitters. That's so cool. And then I got myself a Scar King cup because I love the bad guys. I always love a good bad guy. So I wanted to give myself a Scar King cup. And then my brother was nice enough to give me the Godzilla and Kong cups. So there's Godzilla and Kong. Yeah! So just to manage some expectations, not only for the movie, but also for this review, my opinion on this movie is going to change a lot when I get to see it a couple more times. I'll either like it more the more I see it, or I'll like it less. Sometimes I like movies less the more I see them. Sometimes the more I see them, the more I come to appreciate them. With Godzilla vs. Kong, I really didn't have an opinion of the movie until my third watch. It's one of the reasons that I held off on doing a review, was because I really didn't have anything to say about the movie in the first place. I just didn't have a strong opinion on it. And I kind of feel similar here in that I don't have the strongest opinion on this movie, so if you're somebody who loves this movie and wants to hear me glaze it, or if you're somebody who hated this movie and wants to hear me trash all over it, neither side's gonna be really satisfied, because I personally felt that this movie was a really solid mixed bag. Like, there were some things in here that I freaking loved, and then there were some things in here that I could have done without. And going along with the managing of expectations, going into this movie, just know that this is a movie made for children. It's made for families with a strong market towards children, and there's nothing wrong with that. Some of the greatest Godzilla movies ever made were made with that in mind. Movies like Mothra vs. Godzilla, Invasion of Astro Monster, my favorite Godzilla movie, King Kong vs. Godzilla. Even getting into the Millennium Era, movies like the Kiryu Saga, where generally speaking, they knew that those movies were going to appeal to a younger demographic. There's nothing wrong with that. Also, just know that if you've seen the trailers for the movie, you've seen the movie. I felt like there was almost nothing left in this entire movie that I didn't see in the trailers, which I didn't expect, because while I had so much of this movie spoiled for me going in, there was no surprises really. I can't think of a single thing that caught me off guard in this entire movie. Well, that's the case. What I wasn't expecting was that pretty much the entire movie made it into the marketing. All the big moments, all the big fight scenes, everything. I had seen it all before. So if you've seen all the TV spots and if you've seen all the trailers, and I haven't, I've missed some of the trailers, I've missed a lot of the TV spots, and I still felt like I got nothing out of the first watch of this movie, which is another reason the subsequent viewing is going to help me reshape my opinion, because that does leave me a little disappointed. But one thing that really helped about it was that I got to see it with a lively audience of children. There was a lot of children in this audience, and in fact I could have seen the movie earlier, but I wanted to wait for my little brother, who's not really a child anymore, but I wanted to wait to see it with my little brother. I could have already seen this movie if I wanted to, but I wanted to wait to watch it with him because I like experiencing movies with him, especially movies that I'm a little on the fence about, like this one. And so it just helped me warm up to it. And seeing this movie in a crowd of children, there was kids freaking head banging, there was kids like jumping up and down, there was a kid clapping and throwing his hands up. We had Team Kong kids, we had Team Godzilla kids, everybody was cheering together. Like, all these kids were having a great time, and it was just so freaking wholesome, which is how I would describe this movie. This is truly just good, wholesome entertainment. It's a feel-good movie. It just left you feeling good, and that's what I really appreciated about it. But also what I love about it is that while it's a movie made for kids, it's also a movie that is going to be traumatizing for some kids. For instance, Kong does something almost right off the rip in this movie that made this little girl in our theater just screaming, crying, and she was so devastated, and she stayed crying for like 5 minutes. And you know what, normally that'd be really annoying, but this was the funniest thing ever. All of us thought it was hilarious. There was people laughing in the theater, and I feel bad because, you know, we're laughing at a little girl's crying, but it was so funny. If you're like, there's no way this movie's made for kids, it's got blood in it. Well, first of all, the blood is green. That's how you know it's made for kids. Look at the Gamera films. Look at Ultraman, a television show made for children, which was often bloody, but also the blood was censored and it was either green or whatever, or sometimes it was red, sometimes. And look at some of the Godzilla movies that were specifically designed for children, where Anguirus gets his face buzzsawed or where Godzilla gets his neck exploded. A lot of the times there's blood in Godzilla movies. It's weirdly the ones geared mostly towards children. The more mature Godzilla films withhold the blood for some reason. I don't understand. That's not always the case. Point is, this movie is clearly a family movie. It's aware that children are going to be the ones enjoying it the most, and there's nothing wrong with that. It truly was a feel-good time, and I would love to introduce some kids to this movie. Like, if this was a movie that I saw when I was 8 years old, this would have been my favorite movie ever made. It probably would have been my favorite movie ever made up until like the age of 12, and at about 12 I probably would have started to be like, yeah, there's some things in there that I could have done without. But on the whole, this was a fantastic time. Getting into some of my thoughts on the movie, I felt that the pacing was really strange. This felt like a montage movie in the modern age, and I say that sometimes about Kong Skull Island, but this completely shattered my perception of Kong Skull Island's editing. If you think that there's anything strange about the Kong Skull Island pacing or editing, you're not ready for this movie, because this movie felt like a 4-hour movie smushed into about 2 hours, which is another way to say this was two movies that happened at the exact same time. This was both simultaneously a Kong story, Son of Kong, following up on Godzilla vs. Kong, and it was also weirdly a sequel to Godzilla King of the Monsters at times, and it was smushed into one movie, and it wasn't smushed very neatly. It was so rapid paced. We traveled the globe in seconds in this movie. You'd go from one point of the globe to the other. I could never really tell where anybody was, despite the fact that they'd have nameplates coming up on screen being like, we're in Gibraltar. Great. How did we get there? Hey, if the back half of this video is like weirdly noticeably lower quality than the front half, that's because the video got corrupted. I did my best to uncorrupt it, but it did get compressed a lot. I also lost a little bit of what I was saying. Basically, all I was saying is that over the course of the MonsterVerse, the compression of geography has gotten worse and worse, where in 2014 it took a reasonable amount of time to travel the globe, and in this movie you can't even tell how close things are in relation to each other because they just sort of happen. And the best instance of this is everything going on in Africa, where it almost plays like Godzilla and Kong are looking at each other over the side of a river, even though if you look at a map, they're on like completely opposite ends of the continent. The compression of geography just didn't work very well for me. I found it to be very distracting and pretty sloppy. There's a lot of stuff like that in this movie where it felt like a lot of the ideas were left on the cutting room floor. We know for a fact that this was two different scripts mashed into one movie, and also if you've seen the movie, you can definitely tell that there's a lot of stuff that was cut from the movie. There's clearly a longer version of this that could have existed. They chose not to go with, probably because you can't stretch a movie that's designed for younger audiences out past the 2-hour mark without losing your audience. That's why most of the Showa era films are about 90 minutes or less. And I felt like some of the times that there was an inefficient use of screen time. For instance, there's one entire plot line I would have completely gotten rid of from this movie, which is pretty controversial because it's going to be one of the ones that's a fan favorite. I didn't think it was needed. I just felt like it didn't really add much to the movie and left me with more questions than I did with answers. Like, I didn't get it. I didn't understand why that was in here other than to make us be like, yeah, I love that thing. I love that that thing's back. I did love that that thing was back, but I felt like it didn't belong here. So yes, this was two movies at once. This was a fantastic Kong movie and what could have been a fantastic Godzilla movie. And I think they kind of did this fusion, and in the fusion, some of the greatness got lost and we were left with a pretty fair time. I didn't hate it. There was nothing in this that I was like, oh, I cannot stand this. There's some stuff that I could have done without, but I didn't hate anything in it. And then there was some stuff that I was like, whoa, the potential right there. We were so close. This is how I would describe the movie. The movie is so close to greatness, but never grasps it fully, that it leaves me a little like, oh, we were right there. We were verging on what was potentially some of the coolest stuff ever, and we just didn't make it quite there. There's one scene in particular that I'll get into in my spoiler review that is like the perfect scene that sums this up, where it's something Kong does something that I went, wow, they completely understood Kong as a character. They nailed it. Not even but 30 seconds later, he completely undoes the thing he did, and I was like, you may have gotten it, but you didn't grasp it as well as you could have because you completely just spit in your own face right there. That's how I felt about this movie at times. Sometimes the movie gets in its own way is what I'm trying to say. The visual storytelling was really awesome. There was really strong periods of this movie where we were just spending time with Kong existing by himself. These wonderful wonderful nonverbal scenes. Music was a little holding your hand, trying to tell you how to feel during those sequences, but on the whole, I really liked those nonverbal sections. I don't think it could be sustained for a whole movie. If you were to remove the human element from this movie, I'm completely checked out. I really enjoy those moments we spend with Kong, and I like how much time we spent with Kong doing his own thing, but I can't stand monkey noises with no dialogue or just monster noises over the course of a whole film. You're gonna dwindle your audience down to like 12 hardcore guys who are like, this is what I always wanted, a Godzilla movie with no humans and only monster noises. And the rest of us are like, woof, that's boring. But I really loved a lot of the movie. Don't know how I feel about the human story because I felt like the cast often just showed up to spout exposition and hold the audience's hand through the film. And it clicked for me on the drive home when my friend pointed out that, yeah, that's because this is a children's movie. A lot of the time you're cutting to the characters because the characters need to help kind of guide the children through what's happening because kids aren't always gonna get it. So sometimes we cut to dialogue that's like, yeah man, I know, I just saw them do the thing. I know exactly what you're talking about because I just saw them do it. It's like, well yeah, they had to do that because children are gonna watch this movie. Maybe they're not caught up like we are. And so I was saying this movie is kind of weirdly balanced because it's got some of the greatest ideas I've ever seen in a Godzilla and Kong movie, and then at the same exact time it's got some of the most tiring ideas I've ever seen in a Godzilla or Kong movie. I don't think that Godzilla blends into fantasy worlds very well, and I don't think Kong blends into science fiction worlds very well, and those weird clashes were on full display here. There was times when I felt like they could have done some really cool stuff, basically turning Kong into a superhero, but they didn't commit hard enough, and then there was other times when I felt like Godzilla could have had a really awesome sequel to King of the Monsters that they didn't commit hard enough to here. The world building was a little better than Godzilla vs. Kong, but it still just kind of makes shit up and just throws stuff at the wall and is like, yeah, well, the world's progressed. It progressed without you. Catch up. Do the legwork to get us there a little bit. Monarch Legacy of Monsters is gonna have to work its freaking ass off to catch us back up. As for the plot, I felt like there was simultaneously too much plot and also a non-existent plot, almost like the entire movie didn't know what the plot was or what was happening, but it needed to have things keep happening, so they just did. There was a lot of times when I was sitting there going, okay, I don't understand how this plot mechanic works. We're just rolling with it. Okay, we're just rolling with it. All right, I don't even think they know how that works, but whatever, we're just rolling with it. It's like a whole thing with Gravity where I'm like, okay, I don't think this movie understands what it's even saying right now. Which just kind of goes to what I was saying about the cast, is that the cast is really great. Every single character really worked with the exception, or let's say minus one guy who just was there to get eaten. There was a guy in this movie that was clearly there to just be a throwaway, but other than that, every single character was really awesome. They just didn't have anything meaningful to do. It's kind of the balance of this movie, is that there's a lot of stuff that really works and then a lot of stuff that really isn't utilized as well as it could be. Bernie and Trapper were by far the biggest standouts in this movie, which is surprising because Bernie's a character that I think verges on being annoying in Godzilla vs. Kong, and in this movie I think he starts annoying and then he gets introduced to Trapper, a character I didn't think I was gonna like at all, who wound up being my favorite in the movie. That's at the expense though of Gia and Eileen, two of the biggest standouts from Godzilla vs. Kong, which I think are both majorly sidelined in this movie, big time. They have a whole plotline that doesn't even really go anywhere. By the end of the movie, it's almost a joke, the fact that that plotline didn't even happen. Like, it was just all in Eileen's head. And while I thought it led to the most emotionally resonant moment in the movie, it was a really beautiful line. At the same exact time, it just felt like, what are we doing? Either develop the plot or drop it. I kind of feel bad because Gia really didn't have enough to do here. She had a lot of important things to do, but nothing was earned. She didn't have to struggle for any of it. It just kind of happened to her or around her. As for the kaiju, this is where the movie really shines. This is where the movie stands out, and Kong is by far the best part of the movie. It's everything I wanted with 3 major missteps. There are 3 incredibly large missteps in this movie that hold us back from giving me everything I wanted out of the King Kong characterization, and that's not including the Beast Glove, which I really don't like. The Beast Glove accomplishes nothing in this movie. It is totally thrown in there for the sake of toys. Other than that, the Beast Glove really could have been written out of the movie. It doesn't change the tides of anything, really. You can claim it does. It ultimately really didn't affect the movie that much. It didn't need to be there. But other than that, Kong was really, really well characterized, and I really liked the portrayal of him in this movie. Godzilla was fine. It's interesting because he had a lot of interesting things to do, but he just wasn't doing anything interesting himself. It was kind of like Gia. Godzilla had a lot of interesting things that he was up to, but I didn't ever find Godzilla very compelling. I felt like he really didn't carry much screen presence. I felt like his characterization was really nothing. He showed up and it was fun to see him kick some ass, but I felt like I didn't know how Godzilla felt during most of this. I didn't know why Godzilla was doing what he was doing a lot of the time. There are some things where it's like, if Godzilla felt so strongly about this situation that he was gonna do X, then why is it that when Y happens, he responds by doing Z? Wouldn't he more than likely do this instead? There's a lot of that going on in this movie. Suka was actually a surprisingly big standout. It's also a character whose name they never say once in the film, from what I could tell. I don't think they ever name drop the character, but Son of Kong was really great here. The design doesn't do him any favors. I think the design is kind of hideous, but other than that, the characterization I thought really worked for Suka. I really liked him. Scar King is awesome. This dude has all the potential in the world to be King Kong's King Ghidorah. He really could be Kong's arch rival movie after movie. I just don't think they fully realized the potential there. I felt like Scar King really never lived up to the threat. He really never felt like he was all that big of a deal, unfortunately. I felt like that didn't land, nor did I think his motives landed. I felt like Scar King had the lamest motives of all time, that if you had written them out of the movie, nothing in the whole movie changes. And then there was Shimo, who was just kind of there. Cool design, cool power set, very Toho-styled kaiju, didn't have enough to do, and ultimately pretty forgettable in this movie. Again, the threat never really materialized. Is Shimo the biggest Titan ever? Yeah, I guess. You don't really get a sense of that in the movie, though. There's maybe one shot when Kong squares off against Shimo that you feel the scale, but other than that, no, not really. And then other than that, there was a lot of other Titans in this movie that were cool. There were some random ones that popped up. I really liked the ecosystem of Hollow-Earth, and then there is one other main Titan that serves a big function in the plot, and by that I mean this is a big Titan that shows up, and then the plot tells you it's important and then it isn't. This is a Titan that accomplishes essentially one single thing in the entire movie that could have been accomplished with just one script revision, and then you would have not even had to worry about it. Remember when I was saying that some of Godzilla's motivations are weird? I feel like Godzilla's got a real big discrepancy in his motivations that is only there because they wanted this other Titan to solve his problem for him, and it didn't come together for me the way I hoped it would. That Titan's appearance left me with more questions than answers, going, how did that work? How did that even happen? As for the special effects, I think they were pretty good. I think there's a very decent range here from serviceable to astonishing. Some of the stuff here I felt like, well, that was a kind of a clunky, stiff move, but some of the other stuff I thought, wow, I've never seen CG look that good in a Godzilla movie. So that was cool. Now, for a film centered around the action sequences, I think this film was actually surprisingly short on action. The action is by far the best part of this movie, but much like with Godzilla vs. Kong, in the way that I felt like the best part of that movie was the 40 seconds in Hong Kong when Godzilla and Kong were fist fighting, this is a movie that's fights are like as brief as one potty break. Literally the time it takes for pee to leave your bladder, that the fight's already over. Even the final battle in Rio maybe clocks in at like 2 minutes of fighting. It's just there and then it's done. The fights are awesome, but we just don't spend enough time on them. There's a lot of cool set pieces in this movie, but I don't think any of them are utilized to their fullest. The best fight in the movie for me, though, was the rematch between Godzilla and Kong. I loved it. I just thought it was really awesome. There's so many really cool moves in that I was like, whoa, loving seeing how much Godzilla and Kong have both evolved as fighters. That is so great. As for the music, I thought it was generally pretty bad, boring, and bland. It often left me groaning. Unfortunately, the best songs, once again, are left off the album, really annoyingly. And then the needle drops in this movie, well, all of the songs that kicked in were great, were pretty pointless, as they often lasted for like 2 seconds, and it left me wondering why we even needle dropped in the first place. That leads me to my overall verdict on the movie, and that's that I don't quite know where I land on it yet. It's somewhere in between the Skull Island anime, my least favorite MonsterVerse entry, and Kong Skull Island, my favorite MonsterVerse entry, and that's where it's gonna remain for a minute. I don't know. I'm not totally sure how I feel about it yet. This is definitely a throwback to the styles of Jun Fukuda, Shinichi Sekizawa, Yoshimitsu Banno, but with none of the charm of the practical effects and none of the pizzazz of Masaru Sato's score. So ultimately, it kind of leaves me feeling that this is in a way the best of the Godzilla movies that are not my faves, other than Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, which I do like more than this movie. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla I just think is so much freaking fun, and this movie I don't think is quite as awesome as that one. I think that just comes down to the fact that I think Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla is more charming. But yeah, I thought it was a good Kong story, it was a good Godzilla story. Could they have been better on their own? I think absolutely. Did they need to be one movie? No, not really. But am I happy to see Godzilla and Kong getting another cinematic outing together? Absolutely. That's great. It's great that while we can bring these two IPs together, we are doing it. That's awesome. And this movie is really trailblazing. Like, there's a lot of really, really creative ideas in here and a lot of really big swings that I think are going to inform the future of Godzilla for the rest of time. This movie's not a rehash of other Godzilla movies in any way at all, nor is it a rehash of Kong movies. This movie continues the trend that the MonsterVerse started of taking bigger and bigger leaps with Kong's stories and character, and leading us further away from the original King Kong story that has been retold just too many times. So I'm really appreciative of the movie for that. Not gonna give it a rating, but I will say I enjoyed it. I would recommend it to Godzilla fans. I would definitely recommend it to Kong fans. If you're a fan of the MonsterVerse, give it a shot. But just know what you're getting in for. It's kind of a mixed bag, and there's definitely a lot of stuff in here that could have been handled a little better. Alright, thank you guys all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Sorry if I rambled a lot. One of the side effects of the medication I'm on to get me back to normal is that I'm really having struggles focusing these days, and I have big mood swings, so my mood's very exaggerated. So I apologize about that, but thank you for sticking with me here. I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. I really appreciate all the support I get on the Patreon. By supporting the Patreon, you can get early access to content, access to the Discord community, and more. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you guys next time for the next one. D-Man out.